Okay, so today we're gonna get the rear end back up in the car. All right, so I got the sandblaster set up and the rear end outside. We're gonna do some sandblasting today. All right, finished blasting it, and we got her up on the bench here. We're inspecting the welds, make sure everything's good. And I don't see any issues with it, so we're gonna get it a hot bath and repaint it. Okay, so the new gears from Richmond came in, and I got a new seal kit and shim kit here. Rob over at RTH Performance hooked me up with that stuff. I already got the bearing pressed onto the pinion here. So now I'm gonna remove the old gear off the spool and get the new gear on there. All right, so we'll get these bolts off the ring gear that are attaching it to the spool. They're 1/2 inch socket size, 12 points. So I already broke them with the breaker bar. Now I'm just going to use the impact to cover the rest of the way out. Alright, so with all the bolts out of the ring gear here, we can just tap it off. There's a kind of a flange and a lip on the bottom, so you got to give it a little bit of love with the hammer, and it'll drop right out. Like that. So now that that's off, we can inspect the face of the spool here, make sure everything's still flat, there's no edges. This gear is garbage, so we'll throw that out. Okay, so we got the new ring gear here. Just lay that here, drop the spool over it, and line up the bolt holes, pull it up into place. Like that, and then when we get to put the bolts in now, we'll put a bit of Loctite on the threads, and that'll keep the bolts from backing out. Okay, so once the bolts are all tight, everything's squared in, I'm going to torque those bolts now, and the manufacturer recommends 45 to 50 foot-pounds. So we'll go 50 foot-pounds, and then we'll be ready to put this back in the carrier. Alright, so I got the spool and the pinion back into the carrier. It was my first time putting all this back together, so I didn't get a video of it. I kind of had to figure it out there. Me and my dad spent about an hour learning how to do this, so I didn't get any videos of it. But you can find videos of people assembling these all the time. So we got this all set up. We got our backlash set within spec. Everything's preloaded and tightened, torqued to spec. So now what we can do is we can throw this back in the rear end housing. Okay, so we got the rear end housing all cleaned up, painted. Thanks to Sid over at Cape Breton Auto Rad for pressure washing it for me. So we got it set up on the jack stands here. I got this face cleaned off. So now we can drop the third member in. We'll put a bit of silicone here and bolt it up. There it goes, right in. So we'll put the nuts on. I'm not going to torque anything until the silicone sets up a little bit, and then clear out all the silicone from around it. But it's in. Okay, so we got the housing up on the stand there, and the carrier in. So now we'll just reassemble everything reverse order as we took it off. So first we'll put in the axles, and then the brakes and so on. So with the splines, put a little bit of lube on them before we slide them in. turns. We're good to go. Now we'll bolt the retainers on. That'll hold the axles in place. So with the retaining plates back on, we can put the rotors back in. And then once the rotors are on, we can bolt up the calipers. So I got the calipers all cleaned up, painted, and all free and greased up. So now we'll bolt them onto the car. Okay, so we're mounting the calipers onto the rear end here. So to set the depth on the rotor with these custom pads here, we're using some shims here to set the depth. So kind of finicky to get the shims in there and in the bolt, but once you get it lined up there with the shims, basically you're checking to make sure that the pads aren't touching the rotor at any time without the pedal press. So I had to add 3 shims to this caliper to set the depth, and I assume it's going to be the same for the rest of them. Okay, so we got the rear end all back together. We got the calipers and rotors on, axles in, carrier in, a new gear set. So this is now ready to go back into the car. Okay, so before I put the rear end in the car, we got to set up the 4 link bars. The last pass I made in the car at the track, the car went straight, there was no issues there, so the alignment was good. So I measured these before I took them off from rod end to rod end, and I wrote it down. So I'll set these up the exact same way as I took them off the car, and everything will be straight hopefully when we go to run it. Okay, so we got the 4 link bars mounted on the rear end. The shocks are bolted in. So now I'll drop the jack and it'll sit there on the shocks. Okay, so with the rear end in the car, it's time now to fill it up with fluid. So we're going to use an 80 weight gear oil. There's a fill cap at the top of the housing, so we'll take that off. And to know how much to put in, there's actually a plug on the front side. We'll take that plug out and we'll fill it up until it comes out that plug. Alright, so that's it for today's video. We got the rear end in the car, everything's tight, filled up with fluid, ready to go. So in the future video, we'll do an alignment and set the pinion angle and go through all that stuff. But that's it for today. So let me know what you think in the comment section, and we'll see you next time.